Good morning, students in Hebrew. We're going to try to take this quiz using this means, and we'll see how it goes. I want to hear your feedback to see if we can improve how we do this. I just sent you an email that has the quiz attached. And you'll open that document. You can print it out or just take it by hand. And then you should scan or take a picture of the quiz and send it to Jonathan and me, and then let me know in the chat when you're ready, and I'll give you extra time today to make sure everybody completes it, and then we'll move on with class. Look in your inbox to find the email with the quiz attached. And please take it without any helps. And there's a place for you to sign at the bottom, giving your word that you haven't used any outside sources or any help on the quiz. And we take that very seriously, that you give your word and you abide by that. So I hope that this will work out, and go ahead and take the quiz right now. Okay, good. I have a few people finishing now. So those who are still working, please keep working. I want to make sure you have time to finish up. Keep working and then let me know in the chat when you finish the quiz. Thank you. Okay, I see Dante is finished. Thank you, Micah, for your help. Looks like a couple people still taking. Is anybody else still taking it? Please send it to Jonathan and to me. All right, it looks like the last people are sending now. So take out your Hebrew prayer for today. Our day today is Tuesday. We'll do Psalm 19, verse 14. Adonai imachem, nitpalala, yichyu l'ratzon imrei fi, v'hegyon libi lefanecha, Adonai tzuri v'goali. Amen. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Today we continue our discussion of weak verbs, and we should review the categories of weak verbs because we're gradually working our way through them. If you remember, I tried to boil it down into 5 categories of weak verbs, and I've written those right on the board behind me here to review. Weak or irregular verbs in Hebrew fall into these 5 categories. The first category is guttural letters. Whenever the guttural appears in the first, second, or third root letter position, we have a weak root, weak verb. And we've looked at a number of different examples of those, and we'll look at another one today, a subtype. Then we have number 2, the one nun, weak root. And remember that the nun, when it's found by itself in the middle of a word, without a vowel, so it'll usually have a silent shva, it'll assimilate to the following letter. And then we have number 3, the one yod vav root. Number 2, the 2 yod vav root, also known as hollow root. And number 5, when the second and third root letters are identical, also known as the geminate root. So today we're going to look at this third category, one yod vav roots. And we're also going to look at another subtype of the gutturals with olives in the first position. Okay, so we'll focus in on those 2 categories. First, let's take these examples, the one yod vav roots. These verbs fall into 2 categories. One yod roots and one vav roots, as this title indicates. But in this period of biblical Hebrew, they'll both appear with a yod. But historically, there were 2 different sorts. There was the original one yod root, and there was the original one vav root. And again, in this period of biblical Hebrew, it's awkward to have a vav at the beginning, so those vavs became yods. So why am I saying this? Well, because these two different groups will come out differently as they're conjugated in the verb paradigm. And as we've seen before, a historical feature, an earlier feature, can pop into view. It can reappear later on in the formation of the verb. And so it helps to explain, why does this vav reappear in the case of the one vav verb? It reappears because that's part of the historical form. And so that historical observation helps us to understand the forms as they appear to us in biblical Hebrew as we study it. So, one yod or one vav verbs, they're of two types, when they originally began with a yod or they originally began with a vav. So a good example is yatav, no pun intended, a good example, yatav, to be good. And then an example of a one vav is yashav, or originally vashav. Let's take this first group first and look at it and find out what the details are of this group of verbs. Let's think about the third person masculine singular here. And we go back to our strong verb. The strong verb form of the third person masculine singular in the imperfect is yiktol. Now, why are we going to the imperfect immediately? Because these verbs are regular in the perfect. Remember, the perfect only adds suffixes, and the suffix interacts with the end of the word but not with the beginning. And the weakness of this verb is at the beginning. So it's in the imperfect that we really have to pay attention to irregularities. The perfect will have a regular conjugation. Okay, so yiktol. Yiktol. So what we see here, let me get a different colored pen. And I think the vowels are showing up. What we see here is, let me put this up here so we can compare it. Okay, that's our strong form. So we see a chirik and a silent shva here, and then we see a cholim up here. I've written out for us the entire paradigm of the original one yod root, from yatav, to be good. So what we see are two major differences. First of all, we have a chirik here, but there's no silent shva. So this yod and this chirik have really combined into a chirik yod combination without any shva here under the yod. That yod appears right there as a consonant. So we have the yod of the verb prefix and we have the yod of the root. Do you see that? Two yods right next to each other. The second difference is we have a patach as this vowel right here. So those two differences as we compare it to the strong form. The nice thing about this root is that all three of the root letters appear in the paradigm. So let's review that again. there are going to be two differences in the original one yod root. First, there's no silent shva here in the prefix of the verb. There's no silent shva, there's just the chirik. And second, instead of the cholim vowel, you're going to have a patach. I don't remember if we've used this terminology before in this class, but when there's a vowel between the second and third root letter, as in this case, because we have three root letters, yod, tet, beit. The vowel that's between these two is sometimes referred to as the theme vowel. And Futato, from time to time, uses that term, the theme vowel. That's what that means. It just means the vowel in this position between the second and third root letters. So let's go ahead and pronounce this paradigm of the root yod, tet, beit, yatav, from the verb meaning to be good. And we know that the adjective tov comes from this root. So let's pronounce this together. I'll give time for those who are with me here to repeat after me. Yitav, Titav, Titav, Titvi, Itav, Yitavu, Titavna. You should put the accent in there. It's not given in the textbook. The accent, just like in our strong verb paradigm, the accent is on this syllable. Titavna. Titvu. Titavna. Nitav. So we'll see those two differences, the loss of the silent shva and the patach theme vowel, through all these forms in the paradigm. So you don't have to learn a whole new paradigm, you just have to learn those two differences from the strong paradigm, which you've already learned. If you have any questions as we go, please go ahead and write them in the chat, and I'll get to them when I'm able. So that's that first category, roots that had an original yod in the first position. Now the second group are roots that they now appear with a yod, as in yashav, to sit or dwell. But originally or historically, that root had a vav in the first position. Okay, so that vav isn't going to appear in this paradigm, but later on in other verb patterns it will. So we have to keep that in mind. But it does follow its own special features. And next we're going to look at that root as an example of the original one vav. And I don't have space on the board to write this out. So please open up your textbook if you don't have it open already. I hope you have it nearby. And look at page 109. And we're going to look at that paradigm written out for us there. Any roots that were in this category, having original vav, are a little trickier than the first group that we looked at. So the first and most tricky thing about this is that when it's conjugated in the imperfect, the original yod of the root, or what would have been the vav, the first root letter, will disappear. The yod won't be there, or the vav won't be there. But we've learned it with the yod. So let's say the yod won't be there. So you're going to lose one of your root letters, and you only have the second and third root letters there. So as we look at this paradigm here, we see in the first form, the third person masculine singular, there's a yod there. But that yod isn't the root letter. That yod is the prefix of the imperfect. So you can see this all the way down the paradigm. The yod that we've learned in the vocabulary for this root of yod, sheen, bait is missing. And what we have on the front of the word is simply the prefix of the imperfect verb paradigm. Okay, that's the first feature and the most important feature. So that when you see this form, you can identify the prefix, and then when you remove that, you're left with 2 root letters. Remember, sometimes you're going to be left with less than 3 root letters, and you have to reconstruct the root letter. And so in this case, learning this pattern of weak verbs gives you the ability to restore that yod and to realize that it's yod, sheen, bait, yashav, to sit or dwell. The second feature is that unlike this form, which has a chirik just like the strong paradigm, we're going to have a different vowel in this paradigm. We're going to have the longer form of this vowel, which is the tsere. So instead of the chirik, we have a tsere in the prefix vowel. That's the second feature. The third feature is that the theme vowel, that is the vowel between the second and third root letters, is going to be tsere as well. Not the cholam of the strong paradigm, and not the patach of the original 1 yod verbs, but it's going to be a tsere. So look at this paradigm again on 109. Look at the third person masculine singular form of the imperfect. We're very helpful to have the strong verb right next to it, yiktol. Okay? So let's look at the third person masculine singular form. It's yeshev. So what's the same? The yod prefix is there for the imperfect, and then we have 2 root letters, the second and third root letters, the sheen and the bait. And then in the prefix vowel we have a tsere, and in the theme vowel we have a tsere. So let's pronounce through these forms in this paradigm together to get familiar with how it works out through the paradigm, these 3 features. Repeat after me. Yeshev. Teshev. Teshev. Teshvi. Eshev. Okay, the plural column now. Yeshavu. Teshavna. Teshvu. Teshavna. Neshev. Notice that I pronounced these feminine plural forms, the 2 identical forms, as teshavna. The accent is on the second to last syllable as we have it here. Through all these paradigms, that's where that accent's going to be. So whenever you see it, write it in to remind yourself where the accent falls in that word. All right, so that one is a little trickier, right? It's going to depend upon having a really solid knowledge of the imperfect paradigm and being able to recognize all the prefixes and suffixes of that paradigm and hold fast to the consonants, even though we have some vowel shifts happening. So you have to have that knowledge, the imperfect paradigm. You have to also have a good knowledge of vocabulary items to know, well, what are the possibilities for reconstructing this third root letter. And so you use your vocabulary knowledge to try to figure it out. Now, it's helpful in the textbook because Futado is giving you what the roots are so you can see how it works. You don't have to guess or hypothesize at it as you would when you're parsing this verb, finding it in a biblical context. Any questions about this category, the one Yod Vav? I've now given you an overview of this third type of weak verb, the one Yod Vav. And the reason it's called Yod Vav, as we've seen, is because there are two different groups of verbal roots. There's the verbal root that originally had a Yod and the type that originally had a Vav, but now appears with a Yod in this stage of biblical Hebrew. The first group has two features. The silent shva of the imperfect prefix is lost. That's the first feature. The second feature is that you have a patach theme vowel instead of the cholon. The second group has three features. First, and most importantly, the yod of the root is lost. And so you move directly from the prefix of the imperfect to the second root letter. Second, the prefix vowel is a tsere rather than a chirik. And third, the theme vowel is also a tsere, except in the case of the third person feminine plural, where we have a patach. That's those two forms are the exception, but elsewhere you have a tsere. Or if there's a shva in the paradigm, you don't have it there. So that's a summary of the one Yod Vav type of weak verbs. Now, on page 109, there's some interesting irregular forms. And we see at play a number of the things we've talked about so far. But I'm going to skip those for right now for the sake of time. If we have time at the end, we can come back to look at that box on 109. Like I said, there's some interesting things there, but let's make sure that we cover these two types of weak verbs that we need to cover today. Okay, I see a question coming in from Mark. How do you know which yod verbs were historically Vav verbs, which I think he means that second category? How do you know that? Well, you know it from the textbook because it tells you. But I think you're asking more than that. Actually, it's by observing these two different patterns that what appear to be the same kind of roots. They look in this stage of biblical Hebrew like they're all one yods, but they follow two different patterns. And so really it's not dependent upon whether you know that it's historical form, but it's a way of presenting to you these two patterns. So you need to learn the two patterns, and you also are learning why there are two patterns, and that's not dependent upon whether or not you have memorized every one yod verb that was originally a one vav verb. Hopefully that makes sense. You need to learn these patterns. But really, it's just a small group of variations on the strong verb paradigm that we're learning. All right, so hope that clarifies it. You don't have to go through and try to memorize all these verbs that would have been in that second category. This is for the sake of the presentation. You're learning these two different patterns of the way these verbal roots are conjugated in the imperfect. Good question. Okay, Mark says that makes sense. Good question, Mark. Thank you. Thanks for asking that question. All right, so let's move on now to a subcategory of gutturals, the one aleph verbs. And it's actually not all one Aleph verbs. It's just a smaller group of one Aleph verbs that we're going to look at. And there's a mnemonic for these verbs. Let me get some space up here on the board. And then I'll give you the mnemonic. Okay, here's the mnemonic for Amar, Ava, Achal, Afa, and Avad. On page 109, Furtado gives you this mnemonic sentence. It's another way to do a mnemonic device. Once upon a time, an old king said, in italics, said, I will certainly perish, Avad, if I am not willing, Ava, to eat, Achal, what my wife has baked for me, Afa. Baked. So he puts in italics each English word that refers to one of these 5 one Aleph roots. And I had a simpler way to remember it. That's kind of derogatory toward the king's wife there. So I just said, I say I am willing to eat what you bake for me, even if I perish. That's how I did it. It's a little simpler. It's lacking the fairy tale context of Furtado's mnemonic. So there are more one Aleph verbs than these, but these are forming a subset that are going to follow a certain pattern in the imperfect. All the verbs we're looking at are imperfects. Again, why imperfect? Because the weakness is in the first position. And a couple of these are doubly weak, right? A third hey, okay? But it's actually this Aleph that's going to give us trouble, I'm going to say. But it's not giving us trouble, it's just causing the peculiarities of these verbs. So all of these verbs are going to follow these 3 characteristics by which they're going to vary from the strong verb paradigm that we have up here. Just a little reminder here of katal. Okay, first of all, the Aleph is going to become silent, and it will have no shva. This shouldn't be a big surprise to us because we've already seen that the Aleph is shy. Aleph is quiet at parties and doesn't like to talk. And what happens is that in these other examples we've seen, the preceding vowel lengthens, right? It's like the vowel needs to talk more to make up for the quietness or quiescence of the Aleph. That's exactly what's happening in these one Aleph verbs. The Aleph is getting quiet, and you can tell that because it has no vowel marking. It doesn't have a vowel, it doesn't have a schwa. It doesn't have any marking. It's just the consonant there, which is now quiet. So the first thing is that Aleph is quiet. The second feature is that the prefix vowel is a long cholim. And the third is that the theme vowel is a patach. So all these verbs follow this pattern. So let's go ahead and put these up on the board here. So it's going to be yo, mar, to, mar, to, mar. And then we're going to have to, Marie. And then O, Mar. We'll come back to that. Something is fishy there with that one. So look at that one, see if you can figure out what's going on with the first person common singular, Omar. Yo, Maru. To, Marna. To, Maru. To, Marna. And finally, no mar. All right? All these forms have a silent aleph, and they have a cholam, long vowel preceding. And when there is a theme vowel, it's going to be a patach. So those are the three features that these, all these verbs follow. So now let's look at this strange first-person common singular form. Look at this. There's only one aleph. There's only one aleph. Let me put it up here. What we would have expected would be two alephs. See two alephs? So we have the prefix of the imperfect, and then we have the aleph, which is the first root letter of that root. This is what we would have expected. But this aleph is silent, and we already have another aleph. So it's purely a result of efficiency. There's no need to write two alephs in Hebrew. This silent aleph will just be elided, and we'd have the aleph here. That is the aleph prefix of the imperfect. We no longer see the aleph of the root there. It just feels kind of redundant to have those two alephs to Hebrews, and so they don't even write the second aleph, because knowing the paradigm, you know that that aleph is supposed to be there. So that's what's going on. That's what's going on here. That we have the aleph of the prefix of the imperfect, and the silent aleph, the second aleph, is elided. Okay, so with that explained, we can pronounce our way down this paradigm here on the board. Get ready to repeat after me. Yomar, Tomar, Tomar, Tomari, Omar, Yomaru, Tomarna, Tomaru, Tomarna, Nomar. So here we have the second type of weak verb that we're discussing today, a subtype, the one aleph verbs. It's not all one alephs, it's just this group of 5 one aleph verbs that follow this pattern. The other one alephs will follow the pattern of the one guttural, and follow all the general guttural guidelines. But in this case, we have three features. One which we are very familiar with already, that an aleph can become quiet. So the aleph becomes quiet, feature number one. The preceding vowel is a long cholim. Actually, we've already encountered that, the lengthening of the preceding vowel. But we wouldn't guess that it would be a cholim, as it is in this case. And number three, the patach theme vowel. And we have a mnemonic to remember these 5 verbs. Amar, ava, achal, afa, avad. To say, to be willing, to eat, to bake, and to perish. And the mnemonic is, I say, I am willing to eat what you bake for me, even though I perish. That's how I do the mnemonic. Now, the good news is that actually these verbs are not all equally common in the Hebrew Old Testament. Amar is the most common. Amar, to say. It's very common. So, and the fact that it's so common probably supports its irregularity, as we've seen, that common words tend to be irregular, or they can sustain the irregularity. So that's the most common word. The most you're going to see this pattern is in Amar, to say, which that verb is all over the place. Ava, willing, is not that common. Achal, pretty common. To eat comes up quite a bit. Not as much as Amar, but achal, to eat. Afa, to bake, doesn't come up very much. It's not very common to hear about people baking things. And avad, to perish, is mildly common. It can come up. So these two are runners up, but Amar is the most common one. All right, any questions about this group of one aleph roots? This is a good time to ask any questions if you have them. I'm going to start to discuss the vocabulary, and it'll give you a little bit of time if you have a question to post it in the chat right now so I can respond to it. But I have to say, first of all, that I said I was going to give a reward for mnemonics last time, and I didn't give out the reward. The reward is a tov meod. It means a very good. And I have to give it to Mark, because Mark tried actually several mnemonics. So he got the Perseverance Award, but he also got the award for the herd sticks to its own. I'm sorry, the flock. Yes, you got to be careful and distinguish bakar from tzon. So the flock sticks to its own. So Mark, Tov Meod. You get the Tov Meod award for that mnemonic. And I'm offering another Tov Meod today for mnemonics. We're not going to do any mnemonics as we go through the vocabulary list. When I come to the end of the list, I'll look to see if you have any mnemonics you want to share in the chat, and I'll give another Tov Meod today for the best mnemonic. So let's go to the vocabulary list on page 110. Mark says, yay, he's happy he got the Tov Meod. Go to the vocabulary list on page 110. It's going to be hard for me because I like to comment, but I'm not going to comment until we get through all of these and I look at if there are any suggested mnemonics, okay? Page 110. Look at the top of the right-hand column. And if you're able, pronounce along with me like we normally do. Look at it, because this is good practice for your pronunciation. And we're getting less now because you're not here in class to get to do it with me, so this is important. So look at that first form. Repeat after me. Goy. Goy. Now that chol and vav yod blend together, and so it's not goy. Goy. It's not. You don't do that. They form together in a diphthong. Goy. Okay, you can still hear the yod there, but it's merging with the cholim. So goy means nation, Gentile. It's hard not to comment, but I'm going to exercise discipline. All right? Look at the second form. Repeat after me. Dom. Dom. It's not a bad word. It's okay. You can say it. It's Hebrew. Dam means blood in Hebrew. Look at the third form. Repeat after me. Hav. Hav. Hav means a mountain or hill country. Rugged, hilly, mountainous country. Highlands. I don't see any mnemonics yet. Go ahead and enter them in if you have any right now, because there's a little bit of a delay before I get it, so feel free to do that. We're on the fourth form on page 110, going through our vocabulary list. Repeat after me. Yam. Yam. Yam means sea. Okay, let's look at the last vocabulary item on the right-hand column. I see mnemonics appearing there. That's good. Repeat after me. Tsava. Tsava. Tsava means army or host. All right, we're moving to the second column, the left-hand column. And this first word has a shurik vowel. And then notice that there's a patach there, but that patach is moved to the right ever so slightly, which indicates that this is a furtive patach, the sneaky patach. And it should be pronounced before the consonant rather than after. Normally we pronounce the vowel after the consonant, but in this case you pronounce it before. And that's because the furtive patach helps the guttural pronunciation, right? Gutturals like A-class vowels. Those are comfortable for them. And so this is easing the transition from the shurik to the guttural. Repeat after me. Ruach. Ruach. Ruach means breath, wind, or spirit. It's very hard not to comment. I'll restrain myself. And then now we have some of these one aleph roots that we discussed today. Okay, we have it in our vocabulary list right now. Repeat after me, the second form in the left-hand column. Avad. Avad. Avad means to perish. Repeat after me. Ava. Ava. Ava means to be willing or want. Second to last vocabulary item. Repeat after me. Haya. Haya. Haya means to be. Look at the last form, the last word in the vocabulary list on the bottom of the left-hand column. Repeat after me. Chaya. Chaya. Chaya means to live, to be alive. So we want to distinguish these two, and Futaro probably puts them next to each other so you can be clear about the difference between them. They look very similar. What's the difference? The first one begins with a hey, and the second one begins with a chet. Okay, it doesn't look like a big difference. When you look at it, it's just the difference between having that little gap and not having it in the letter. But it's a huge difference in terms of the difference between these two verbs. Haya with a hey is to be, and chaya with a chet is to live. So some people, some of you, and I've probably done this too in the past, are making enough of a difference between a hey and a chet. Okay? So this is an opportunity to make sure you get that really clear because it can change the word that you're talking about here. All right. Wow. I can't believe it. I made it through this whole vocabulary list without making any comments or mnemonic devices. And I see some good ones coming in now. So let's take a look. And I think Gregory is at least getting the word for the most suggestions. So let's see what he says. He says, "Dam, I cut myself and I'm bleeding." Okay. Not sure if that one is for all audiences, but that's a good mnemonic. I cut myself and I'm bleeding. All right, Sam says, well, Sam has a way he remembers it from a Bible Project video that he watched. So that is a type of mnemonic, isn't it? If you've seen it in some place before, or you can connect it to something. So I always recommend the Bible Project videos, and I suppose that's the Spirit of God video, Sam, is that right? Because Ruach is the word used for the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament. God's Ruach, or Ruach Adonai. So I'll give you another example of a connection to make. So I remember this word, Ruach, not with a word play, but by connecting it to the opening verses of Genesis. Because in the opening verses of Genesis, the Ruach Adonai is hovering over the waters of the deep before God creates. It's the word Ruach, the first introduction. I think it's, Sam says, I think it's called Ruach. Okay, it could be a word study video, which they also have in the Bible Project. Thanks, Sam. So this is that word for God's Spirit hovering over the waters at the beginning of creation. So that's a connection I can make in my mind that can also help me remember it. Let's see what else we have. This is fun. Okay. Ignacio says, "I am alive." Okay? I am alive. That's a good effort, Ignacio. I'm just worried it might be confused with Hayam alive, to be alive. So, but we try them and we see if they work, right? So if that works for you, that's good. Let's see. Ooh, Gregory. Here's one for mountain. He says it's hard to climb a hill. Remember the Hebrew word is har. hard. It's hard to climb a mountain. I like that one. In fact, I've used that one before. So that's good. Is anybody else going to challenge Gregory? He even has another one. Let's see. Ah, okay. Very good. He has one for ruach. And he's just pointing out that we've used this before, right? When I say Adonai imachem, you say va'im ruchacha. Ruchacha that has ruach in it. It's ruach plus cha, your, the possessive pronoun suffix, which we've learned now, right? And we had in this quiz. The second person masculine singular pronoun suffix. So that's another type of mnemonic, not a wordplay, but a connection to something you already know, that's already in your memory. Va'im ruchacha. So the problem with that is that it doesn't have ruach in its absolute form, its dictionary form there. So you still have to remember that it's ruach and not ruch, because it looks a little bit different. All right. We're almost out of time here. I think that I want to give Gregory the Tov Meod today. Gregory, Tov Meod. You gave us a lot of different mnemonics and some really good ones. It's hard to climb a mountain. And I have to say, I wouldn't talk this way at home around my kids, but Dom, I cut myself and I'm bleeding. That's a good one. I have to admit it. What other ones do I have to offer you in the last few minutes we have remaining here? Goy is what Jews call Gentiles. And, you know, a Jewish mother might say to her daughter, you know, don't get mixed up with that goy. You don't want to marry a goy, about a Gentile boy. So, goy. You could say yam. Yum. A sea of my favorite beverage. Whatever your beverage of choice is. Yam, a sea of it. And I always remembered Tzava because of the title of God, Adonai Tzavaot. Tzavaot is the plural of this word for army, so it means God of armies, God of hosts, which is how it's usually translated. And I always remind Neshota students, that's not a sacramental reference. Lord of hosts. It means God is the warrior God. The warrior God, commanding angel hosts. Let's see. I always think with Haya, I always think of martial arts. Haya! So you could say, Haya, I am a black belt. The verb to be, I am. All right, so there's some of my suggestions for you, and you got some of your fellow students' suggestions. I hope that this helps in learning these vocabulary words and it makes it fun. Thanks for your patience. I know that this isn't an ideal learning situation, and I'm trying to improve it as we go. And give me your feedback about taking the quiz this way and how things are going in the class. I want to keep improving it and making it better. And thanks a lot for your patience. And we're all bearing with one another during this time and trying to be responsible and considerate to others. I appreciate it. Thank you for your attention today.